Welcome to the Return to Sports Conditioning online training. Thank you to our LA Unified community for assisting our student athletes with our return to athletics conditioning. The CIF is scheduled to start athletic competition at the end of the 2020 calendar year. After months of being sedentary, it is imperative that our student athletes are physically fit before engaging in rigorous activity. The pandemic presents many challenges for all of us, and this training will assist in creating a safe environment for all participants. LAUSD has created a timeline to meet our conditioning needs. Step 1. All participants must have a negative COVID-19 test no more than 3 days or 72 hours prior to entering our campuses. This presentation will emphasize the protocol for this first phase of athletic conditioning. As you can see by this timeline, the CIF has broken all sports into 2 seasons. If the LA County Department of Public Health allows, practice for Season 1 may begin in December 2020. Once again, if the LA County Department of Public Health allows, CIF Season 2 may begin in February 2021. These schedules will depend on the health conditions at that time. The Los Angeles Department of Public Health requires that pods are formed to limit the spread of the virus. All participation by coaches and students alike is voluntary, and therefore, no transportation will be provided. As a reminder, students cannot be assigned to a pod until they have met all eligibility requirements, which will be reviewed later in this training. When forming pods, schools may select as many start times as needed. The recommended start times are 7 a.m., 3 p.m., 4 p.m., and 5 p.m. if mutually agreed upon by the school administration and coaches. Here are some helpful reminders for all of your pods. Students must remain in consistent pods, and they may not change pods at any time. Pods may not exceed more than 12 students. Coaches may sign up for multiple start times based on their availability. Students will confirm their pod availability with their coach, who will then submit completed pods to the school site administration. Cleared students without a coach will contact their athletic director to schedule a pod placement. All protocols must be maintained to ensure student and employee safety. This protocol will provide clarity to all staff members regarding what is allowed. All coaches and players must pass the LAUSD screening protocol prior to entering campus. All participants should enter through the designated screening entrance. Only outdoor activities are permitted during conditioning. This means the gym, locker room, weight room, and other indoor areas are off limits. No bodily contact is allowed, and all activities must remain at a minimum of 8 feet of social distancing at all times. Pods must not exceed 12 students, and students may not change pods at any time. Conditioning may not exceed 1 hour in duration, which should include time for entering, exiting, and disinfecting. Face coverings must be worn during pre- and post-workout. All students must have their personal water bottles labeled. No handshakes, fist bumps, or high fives are permitted. No equipment is allowed at this time. Chewing gum, sunflower seeds, and spitting are prohibited. Signage should indicate the one point of entrance where staff and athletes are required to screen prior to entering campus. Markers should remind participants of the required 6 feet of social distancing. A certificated staff member should be present at all times and must possess and have knowledge of an emergency action plan and a defibrillator. Students and staff will need to follow specific traffic patterns with a minimum of 6 feet of social distancing while entering and exiting the school. Spectators may not enter campus or line up at check-in. They must remain in their car if dropping off before conditioning or picking up student post-conditioning. Students should not congregate pre, post, or during their conditioning outside of their designated pod. Students must exit and leave immediately following conditioning. Hands must be sanitized pre and post conditioning. Finally, conditioning must be conducted on campus. There will be a maximum of 80 cleared students on campus for each start time. Pods must remain in designated areas to prevent the spread of the virus. Conditioning should be a gradual buildup in intensity. These are some samples of stations that can be provided. But remember, pods cannot be mixed. You only belong to one pod in one designated area. Warm up, cardio, agility, hydration, strength training, plyometrics, and cool down. School sites should provide a remote meeting for all student athletes and their parents, informing them of their responsibilities and schedule. All coaches will need to be certified in Principal's portal prior to authorizing any in-person contact, validating all requirements have been completed. Review all MISIS rosters of student athletes to ensure all participants have a cleared physical and have completed all additional eligibility requirements. School sites should also make available additional PPE and water for athletes and employees. Create an equitable Title IX compliant facility schedule that gives access to all teams while keeping the campus below the mandated threshold on campus. Allowable times are 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. before school, or 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. after school, Monday through Friday, with mutual agreement between coaches and administrators. Saturdays are at the discretion of the school site administration and would occur between 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Adhere to LA Unified testing protocols for student athletes, student managers, and coaches. Signage should be displayed providing clear guidelines. Review disinfecting and restocking schedule of restrooms and limit occupancy based on the size of the restroom with the plant manager. Provide sound amplification for coaches wearing masks, such as artificial whistles and bullhorns. Prior to starting athletic conditioning, all student athletes must have the required paperwork completed and signed by their parent or guardian. Student athletes need the following documents: a signed and stamped physical form from a doctor, which is valid for 12 consecutive months, an emergency card, a signed code of conduct, a signed steroid acknowledgement, a signed hazing and bullying acknowledgement, proof of insurance, a signed media release, a signed concussion acknowledgement, a signed parent consent to participate, opioid abuse acknowledgement, a signed liability waiver, a signed sudden cardiac arrest acknowledgement, and a COVID-19 waiver. All paid coaches in the Los Angeles Unified School District must have the following requirements met prior to starting a coaching position and having any contact with student athletes: a background check cleared by the Department of Justice and FBI, a negative TB test or chest x-ray, a certificate of passing coaching education, which is good for life, a certificate of completion of concussion training, which must be renewed every 2 years, and sudden cardiac arrest training, which also must be renewed every 2 years. Paid coaches must also possess a valid current CPR certification card, which includes defibrillator training. This certification must be renewed every 2 years. A current first aid certificate, which is also renewed every 2 years. Cheerleading coaches must have an American Association of Cheerleading Coaches and Administrators, AACCA, certificate, which must be renewed every 4 years. Aquatics coaches must complete the safety training for swim coaches through the American Red Cross, and it must be renewed every 2 years. And heat prevention illness training every 2 years. LAUSD also requires all coaches to complete child abuse certification and suicide prevention every year online using your single sign-on through MyPLN. School sites will also require an annual signed code of conduct. Complete the NFHS course, COVID-19 for coaches and administrators. A volunteer coach is any coach that has contact with student athletes and is not in a paid coaching assignment for that sport. These coaches must have the following requirements met prior to coaching and having any contact with any student athletes: a cleared background check by the Department of Justice and FBI, a negative TB test and or chest x-ray, a certificate of passing coaching education, no expiration, a certificate of completion of concussion training, which must be renewed every 2 years, and passing a sudden cardiac arrest training, which also must be renewed every 2 years. In addition, volunteer coaches must always have a current CPR first aid certification that must be renewed every 2 years. Volunteer coaching form on file at your school, signed by the site administration. A signed code of conduct must also be completed annually, and the NFHS course COVID-19 for coaches and administrators completed. Health authorities require those who have tested positive for COVID-19 to complete an isolation period. Those who may have been exposed to COVID-19 and do not have symptoms of COVID-19 must complete a quarantine period. Our athletes that are practicing in a pod, if someone tests positive, the entire pod will need to go into quarantine. A plan or protocol will be implemented to initiate a school exposure management plan consistent with DPH guidance that outlines procedures for isolation of cases, identification of persons exposed to cases at school, immediate quarantine of exposed employees and or students, and assurance of access to testing for all exposed individuals within the school as the basis for further control measures. Reporting of all COVID-19 exposures at the school to the Department of Public Health will be done by completing the COVID-19 case and contact line list for the educational sector. Plan to immediately report a cluster of cases, 3 or more cases within 14 days, to the Department of Public Health via email at acdc-education@ph.lacounty.gov or by calling 888-397-3993 or 213-240-7821. The Department of Public Health will work with the school to determine whether the cluster is an outbreak that will require a public health outbreak response. This concludes the LA Unified Athletic Department Return to Sports Conditioning online training.